Hi everyone and welcome to Noise Busters. On today's show, we are very delighted to welcome a very special guest. But before we do that, we'll just check in and see how George is doing and coping with life. Hi George, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Everything's going okay here. We're just, it's not been too cold. We're normally used to minus 25 kind of temperatures in January, and it's been above freezing at the moment. So it's been tropical, shorts on, sunning ourselves. It's all been lovely.
We've actually got floods where we are at the minute. So
I did see Boris Johnson in a high-vis jacket floating around. I thought that was
yeah.
Coming through, out of the way. Oh, bloody.
Boris in a high vis is always a dangerous thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So Liverpool, is that all flooded quite bad, or is it okay?
It's in Warrington actually, so it's where our office is. So a few members of staff, well, not that they are going into the office at the minute, but if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to. They've got sandbags and stuff, so it's pretty extreme actually.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've got my kayak here if anything like that happens, so I have no excuse for getting to work. So
I'll let them know.
It's a bit wet out here. I might be a bit late to the office.
The day-to-day role of today's guest is the managing director at the Noise Abatement Society in the UK. Her background is a corporate responsibility specialist and has 20 years' experience in stakeholder and crisis management, something that might be very useful in the times we live in. Since joining the Noise Abatement Society in 2009, our guest has been a driver for the development of soundscape standards, including BS ISO 12913, which focuses on methods to measure and assess sound and its effects on people. Our guest is very busy promoting and leading research teams for the principles of soundscape through initiatives such as Sounding Brighton, which is a series of sonic artworks associated with Brighton's White Night Festival, with the objective of changing and challenging notions of sound in public places and exploring practical approaches towards better soundscapes. Today's guest has also somehow found time to complete an MBA and an industrial fellowship at the University of Sheffield in soundscape and its application in the built environment. Now, also doing doctoral research in urban studies and soundscape at Heriot-Watt University, we're delighted to welcome Lisa Lavia. Hi Lisa, how are you doing?
Hello Dan. Hi George. Good to see you guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. I really appreciate you coming on the show and having a chat. It's great to get a slightly different outside perspective from the people we've talked to previously. So it's really appreciative that you've come on and done this. So
thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Really, I want to start diving into kind of the background of yourself, and we really like talking to people in acoustics industry who have a non-traditional background, such as those as people have come from industry, from different specialisms, and in particular exploring why they did that. So I guess first we'd like to really explore a little bit about your professional background, how you got a career in acoustics, and how you came to join the Noise Abatement Society.
Well, I didn't know it until I actually joined the society, but I've been interested in acoustics all my life. I've always been sensitive to noise and really inspired by sounds that I love. And before I joined the society, long before, I created my own sound walks or quiet walking spaces. I would normally walk to work wherever I was living or working, and I would find non-noisy routes to go down and was very aware of the sounds around me. And I didn't think consciously about it, but I definitely made conscious actions to avoid areas that I felt were too noisy or where I was sort of bombarded by lots of sounds that I didn't like let's say heavy traffic when I was in the morning commute. And so I used to regularly wear headphones or ear plugs wherever I went, if I was, let's say, in London on the tube, or if I had to walk along a busy road. So I was always innately very aware of sound and how it affected me personally. And over the course of my career working in large corporate companies, I was regularly engaging with stakeholders from policy, other areas of industry, research and academia, and also NGOs, nonprofit organizations, pressure groups. So I was always very aware of the need to have constructive dialogues amongst all stakeholders to solve problems. And I always looked at that as a form of part of the innovation cycle, because companies can develop, in my opinion, just much richer solutions to problems if they have constructive dialogues with stakeholders from across the board, some of which they may more naturally agree with, and those who they might be diametrically opposed to in terms of views and what people think are viable outcomes. But in the course of those conversations, one of the things that always struck me is that the starting point for any successful collaboration is people listening to each other. So I was just always very aware of how important it is to listen to people, what they say, how they're saying it, what they don't say. And for me, that just also rolled over into my interaction with the natural environment and with where I, lived, worked, played, etc., in terms of how I just interacted with the world around me acoustically. And it had always been a goal to go back into the charity or not-for-profit sector. I'd started my career in the not-for-profit sector, and the time came to do that, and I began looking for opportunities. But I had always worked with technical communications and working primarily in the business-to-business environment. So I wanted to work somewhere where there were technical issues and maybe issues that were a bit obscure, not that easily understood, maybe where there was a lot of misunderstanding among stakeholders, and lots of opportunities for stakeholder engagement, lots of problems to solve. And I put the word out to my contacts, and somebody introduced me to a lady named Poppy Skeeler, who's the granddaughter of John Connell, who's the founder of the Noise Abatement Society. So we met and we began talking. What do you do, etc. I said, well, I'm looking for an opportunity in the charity sector. And she said, well, my family runs a charity. And I asked her what it was, and she said the Noise Abatement Society. And of course, well, I had not necessarily, of course, but I had never heard of them before. And I said, well, what do they do? And she said, well, the role of the society is to help find solutions to noise pollution problems. And I couldn't believe it. I pulled out my earplugs and I just said, well, I think I'm really interested in finding out more about this. So it was completely serendipitous in one sense. And when I then began to research the topic more and more, I felt like I'd been living in a parallel universe. I thought, my gosh, I've been concerned about these issues for years now, but certainly never really knew how to articulate them, and certainly didn't know there was this, whole other area of life where people did this stuff for a living and looked at noise problems and looked at how to solve them. So I was hooked, if you will, right from the start. And that was 2009, and the industry has never disappointed me. It's fascinating, it's exciting, it's frustrating, it's invigorating, and it's all those things at once. And I can just I'm always excited to tell people about what I do, and I don't think I've met anybody who, the same as me, if they didn't really understand even a little bit about acoustics, or they didn't really understand how noise pollution is dealt with in the built environment, they also get very excited about it once they engage with the topic. I think sound and acoustics is just one of those things that innately people respond to, because of course sound affects us all emotionally, physically, in everything that we do. So even if people haven't thought about the topic or studied the topic or been acquainted with the topic beforehand, once they begin to hear about sound and how it affects us, I find people just really respond to the topic and always want to know more.
A lot of your work has been involved in promoting soundscapes and the principles of it. But I'm interested to hear, like, I know you talked a little bit about, putting earbuds in and about the sound environments around you. But where do you think that kind of appreciation for nature started for you personally?
Although a lot of the work I do is very public, I think I'm naturally more of an introvert. And from the time I was really young, I used to find quiet places to read or write because I really like to do both of those things. And I have always found that I get rejuvenated when I'm in natural environments. So I just always sought these things out. And it may be like we always go back to a favorite piece of music, something that makes us feel calm. For me, I just always felt calm if I could be out in nature or have some access to the natural environment. Even in a city environment, I would still find ways to access nature, even if it was just going through small pocket parks or what have you. So because I always sought those things out, and because I was doing it to be calm and restorative, I think I just always practiced active, what we might now call active listening. And that's really part of learning how to manage our response to noise, as well as learning how to, act proactively manage exposure to sound, the sounds around us, and if you will, curate our environments as well.
So with soundscaping, for example, but is that the aspect that appeals to you and interests you the most? Is that your main passion?
Yes. When I joined the Noise Abatement Society in 2009, I began working with my colleagues, and in particular, of course, Gloria Elliott, who is the chief executive of the society. And we began talking about, well, at this juncture of the Noise Abatement Society, what are the main things that we should be focusing on? What are, the key issues, if you will, the big questions in acoustics? Where can we make the most amount of difference? Because we are a small charity, and regardless of the size of a charity, I've never met any charity that isn't saying, they're all charities are under-resourced to some extent, because usually the issues that they're dealing with are very hard to solve and span lifetimes. Noise is no different. So it is that, with our resources, where can we spend our time and our actual resources of time, people, investments in areas that are going to have the maximum amount of impact in terms of helping people. We began to look at the problem as, in one sense, impossible to solve noise pollution, because one person's noise is another's pleasure, and individuals will always find certain things noisy that other people prefer. So on one level, noise pollution itself is not something that can be easily solved. But what we can do is look at ways to better manage and reduce the impacts of noise pollution. And in 2009, we were at the very beginning stages of the establishment of the ISO working group, the International Organization for Standardization working group on soundscape. And I was encouraged to attend. I had been at the society for about 9 months at that stage and had had several conversations with, various members of the engineering community, and lots of discussions with academics and practitioners and policymakers about decibels, on all sorts of decibels, what's good about them, what they don't measure, and some of the problems. And where we were coming from with our work is just thought, our goal isn't to learn how to measure something better in terms of existing practices, but we're concerned with what is the impact on people. What are people's perception of noise in context? Why do some people find certain things acceptable and others not? And when I attended the Soundscape Working Group, these were all the things that they were talking about, because the soundscape standards have been set up to measure and assess the acoustic environment from the perception of a person or people in context. So that was exactly the issue that we were concerned about with the Noise Abatement Society, and where we felt we could begin to add value and maybe nuance and other views into the conversation, because essentially that approach starts with engagement. To be able to design an effective environment from a soundscape perspective starts with understanding the stakeholders who will be using the particular place that's going to be designed. So soundscape for me was just a very natural fit in terms of my skill set, my interest, but also the work that I have done throughout my career.
I have to admit, I have actually already poured myself a beer.
Come on, man. He did this last time. He poured like a gin and tonic. He'd finished one by the time we started.
Yeah, listen, I don't blame you. I dare not. I'll start slurring my words.
No, basically, no. What I was going to say is that in particular, when working in sustainability, you hear a lot about practice what you preach. It's a very hot topic, but I think there's a lot of people that are guilty of not particularly practicing what they preach. And listen to what you're saying, Lisa, is actually you were already seeking out these soundscapes, and in effect, you are basically preaching what you practiced already, which is sort of refreshing to hear. But I suppose my question is regarding soundscape is that why do you think working towards better soundscapes is important?
Because sound affects everything that we do. It affects all life, but in particular, if we're talking about human beings, sound affects us emotionally, physically, how we feel, how we assess and respond to situations, because of the way we biologically process sound, through the emotions. So, we hear through the ear, we hear the physical sound waves through the ear, or if people are hard of hearing or deaf, they will process the sound waves perhaps in other ways through our bodies. But we all process sound waves physiologically, but we ascribe meaning to sounds that we hear through our emotions. And whether we understand it or not, that's how we are made. So when that was explained to me, as I began to understand more about why people could have such diverse reactions to the same sound, and indeed how the same person could love or really hate the same sound depending on context or what they were doing at that moment in time, having an understanding of the psychobiological response to sound just made perfect sense. It's understandable from an engineering perspective how sound is measured objectively with traditional acoustic practice. And that's important. And those sorts of statistical and engineering skills and responses are needed in order to design and build things. But the purpose of anything that we're designing or building is arguably for someone to be able to use it, and not just use it in a basic get-by manner, but to be able to use it as intended and ideally to improve quality of life as well as health and well-being. So when I heard about the soundscape standard and the development and the philosophical positioning of soundscape, it just made perfect sense to me. And it was, if you will, the missing piece to, in my opinion, how acoustics as a profession is developing. And it's not because traditional approaches to acoustics don't understand that these issues exist with human perception and how there can be such a wide variation. But it's about how does the profession evolve to better encompass the other sorts of professions and skill sets that are needed to begin to design more effectively with people in mind. I mean, people are always in mind for a project, but it's about how can we get better at measuring and assessing, and in some cases, where appropriate, predicting the human response, so that at the end of projects, particularly in the built environment, we don't end up with other sources of noise pollution because how people would respond to things weren't taken into account at the design phase of a project. So the soundscape standards are really designed to augment and sit alongside existing acoustic standards and begin to provide a replicatable framework for designing and specifying the built environment.
It's one of those topics that's just so dynamic. It's got, as you say, you mentioned it's got this crossover with so many other disciplines. We've got, you can see there's products that integrate VR. We've got sociologists, psychologists, architects, landscape architects. It's just an incredibly exciting field, and the way the emotive language you're using is probably going to answer my next question, because it's a question that we ask everybody. For somebody who's thinking of working in the acoustics industry, and I probably know what the answer to this already is it an industry that you would recommend to them, and why?
I mean, just a resounding yes to that. Not pardon the pun. And the reason is because the opportunity for innovation is boundless. The way it was described to me by one practitioner was, when we look at just stopping noise, that's very limiting. And so we look for guideline values, or the bookends, how much can we get away with, or how much do we have to stop? What are our limit values? And then if that's all we're designing for is limit values, okay, it's important, but not necessarily that inspiring, because where do you go once you've hit the limit values? With soundscape, looking at the acoustic environment and sound as a resource, which is as it's described in the soundscape standard, then that opens up the acoustic environment as another layer of the design palette for designers and practitioners and specifiers of new places. And so just like opportunities with visual design and with other areas of holistic design, if we look at sound in that context, the opportunities to design places with sound in mind as one of the features of the design palette opens up endless opportunities for people from across, really every discipline. One thing that acousticians always say, when you say, what's the most important discipline for soundscape, or for acoustics, what's the area that it affects the most? And it's like, well, actually, acoustics affects every industry. So you think of every industry with a whole new design palette, or ability to look at how do we design spaces for people to improve well-being. That's just it's like a whole new industry in and of itself. So I think there's enormous opportunity for people from any discipline. And that goes to the heart of Murray Schafer's thesis on soundscape. And Murray Schafer is often considered, if you will, the grandparent of soundscape. The term was initially coined by a researcher named Michael Southworth, but it was developed by Schafer in his book, The Soundscape and the Tuning of the World, which, is just a great title. Doesn't everybody want to read that? Where he talks about this holistic concept of how sound affects us holistically and how to design for the built environment holistically. And he describes it, the nexus, if you will, of soundscape studies as the intersection between science, society, and the arts. And what he describes is it's only at the nexus of all three of those that you really can get effective soundscape design and management. And he also goes on to say that if you look at it that way, there isn't noise pollution, there's just lack of soundscape management. Because, of course, noise is a subjective response to a sound or collection of sounds that we don't like in a particular context. Again, going back to what I said earlier, we can all love and hate the same sound depending on context and what we're doing at the time.
The three approaches with the arts and the technical sides all coming together, that's a great way of describing soundscape. And I kind of want to get a bit more into the Noise Abatement Society because I have a little bit of an understanding of it, but in my mind, when I hear those words, I think it's people running around with like some kind of weapon or, some kind of Ghostbusters implement to try and abate noise around. It's almost like a little police force.
Noise busters, really.
Yeah, Noise Busters, yeah, big plug. Yeah, but like that's what I have in my mind, but obviously it isn't. But I'd love to know a little bit more about what the objectives are of the Noise Abatement Society, really.
Well, the Noise Abatement Society, or NAS as we refer to it, does what it says on the tin, but it also does many other things as well. The society was started in 1959 by John Connell, who I mentioned earlier, and he lobbied the Noise Abatement Act through the UK Parliament in 1960, making noise a statutory nuisance in the UK for the first time. And it's still one of the world's only noise legislation. There's several other pieces of noise legislation in the UK, but many countries have limited, if any, noise legislation. So the Noise Abatement Act is still very unique in that sense. And that's how the society got its name. And at that time, which 1960, so post-World War II industrialization, the main goal at that time was to stop incessant noise from machinery, traffic, and things like that, because there was a really fast growth of industrialization. So there was just a lot of noise that literally was happening because most people don't like the sound of heavy industrialization. So the aim of the society at that time did start out to stop unnecessary noise. And because the legislation was named the Noise Abatement Act, then you're exactly right. There were people that were going around stopping noise. And in the UK, those people were environmental health officers who were then tasked with stopping noise or dealing with noise pollution problems from a statutory basis across the UK. But as the society grew and moved on, John Connell actually had many of the original members of the Noise Abatement Society did come from all walks of life and across industry and the arts. So there were many, creative and medical and industrial people who were all part of the Noise Abatement Society, and they began to talk and collaborate at meetings, and it soon became apparent to them that, once you stop something, then but how do we enhance, sounds that we want, or how do we preserve things that we want? So. And while this was the original work of the Noise Abatement Society, this is also a natural conversation that does flow when we begin talking to people about sound. We say, if you're going to stop something, well, what do you want in its place? So was a very natural progression. And so at that time, the society started doing many things. They began a project they called the Seal of Quietness, which was an award that they gave to manufacturers and programs that were quieter than the norm at the time. And that program has evolved into the present day Quiet Mark, which the Noise Abatement Society launched, led by Poppy Skeeler, John Connell's granddaughter, in 2012. And that is now its own separate company and just going from strength to strength. John Connell called for more research around noise, how it affects people, and what can be done about it. And that's really the basis of our work in the area of soundscape. So our work, which started out working with researchers and academics, and leading into our, if you call, our research to practice work, which is what my research is about, and why we spend so much time looking at. We might start with a noise pollution problem, but what we're really going for once we stop, if you will, the acute issue of excessive noise, what we want to replace that with is good soundscape management. And that's very akin to a biodiversity approach, where it's not just about cleaning up land or keeping bad things out. The best way to keep bad things out is to make sure that we support good things being in environments. So different varieties of trees, different varieties of plants and things like that. So this is very much akin to a biodiversity approach. And that's what soundscape is like. We might stop noise because something is excessive, but the aim is to not just keep stopping noise, it's to have good soundscape management so that those noise pollution problems don't come back.
So that's really interesting. And I think it's really important to have these societies that are, lobbying is probably not the right word, but they're really trying to make things better and putting pressure on practitioners, governments to make things better and make them more aware of these things. So I find that really fascinating, and I really, almost appreciative that those groups exist. So it really makes our job as practitioners a lot easier sometimes, because often we say this is what should be done, but because there's no kind of pressure or lobbying going on, that it becomes harder to convince, say, a client or a government to make changes for the better of the general public. So I'd love to find out more about NAS in terms of the structure of day to day and what kind of are the backgrounds of the people that do the jobs.
The NAS is now a very small organization in our present form. And the reason for that is because when I go back to when I was talking about when I joined the society and we were looking at, right, how can we be relevant at this stage of the society, so that the society has just had its 60th birthday. So, every decade it's like, right, how can we still remain relevant? And because we began to go very committedly into soundscape and really began to look at the issues, we just thought, noise spans literally every industry. And for one organization to be, for us to have specialists in every potential area, or not potential, actually every existing area of noise pollution, we would have to be huge, have literally hundreds of people because of the disciplinarity required for each area of noise pollution. So we made a decision to be a very lean organization in order to have the highest amount of impact, so that we could then partner with specialist teams of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and specialists in particular areas that we wanted to target, where we felt that we could make the highest amount of impact. It also meant that we could keep ourselves very agile. So if an issue let's say all of a sudden did get solved, or an issue changed in nuance and we needed different specialists, we could then change our focus quickly and always be in a position to work with the best of the best, quite literally, because when one's influencing policymakers at a national level or a local level, or indeed, as we have been doing, working on international standards, we want our input to be of the same caliber as the experts that we're working with. Because we go into a room, we want them to listen to us, we want them to take us seriously. We come into an environment saying, look, we're an honest broker, if you will, in this situation. We don't have a side. We're on the side of how do we get the best solution so that we don't continue to have the same type of problem over and over again. So we want to drive innovation and act as a catalyst, in some cases a disruptor, to really be able to challenge industry, policymakers, and the academic community, the research community, to think different, to do things differently, and to really get to this sweet spot that Schaefer, talked about over 50 years ago when he wrote his book. Not his only book, but the book I mentioned. How do we get to that place of a good symbiotic working relationship between science, society, and the arts to solve noise problems and to enhance and design good quality acoustic soundscapes? Well, that's only going to happen with innovation. So we look at a problem and we say, right, we don't want to just be talking about what everybody else is talking about. How can we challenge the situation, as a critical friend in a constructive way to actually move beyond where people are at the moment? So to answer your question, there's only about 5 of us who work at the society, and we look at an issue and we say, can we add value here through collaboration, through expert collaborations that we can put together? And if the answer to that is yes, if we work on this, are we going to be able to show direct impact on people's lives? In other words, if this challenge, if we could see that fulfilled, would people be happier where they live, work, and play because they have less exposure to the effects of noise because they have better quality soundscape environments? And if the answer to that is yes, then we want to be there, we want to work there. So what we do is we'll then say, right, well, who's working on this issue? Where's the science on this issue? Where are policymakers on this issue? And then we basically put together a plan to start moving that issue to the next stage to make things better. And, it's sort of like sometimes that happens easier than others. And sometimes it takes a long time, but, that's how rocks are formed, right? Dripping water can eventually form rocks. So we, by choice, have kept the society very small and agile as a strategy, so that when we're fundraising for a particular project, because invariably it's rare that one source of funding is going to cover every area of noise pollution where we know that there are problems. So that means we can do targeted fundraising. The charity is supported entirely by donations. We don't have subsidies from the government, although sometimes we do work with policymakers on projects. So, and then we look where the need is, and we say, right, who can we work with to target this project? So I like to say, on the one hand, while we have a core nucleus with just a small number of us, we actually have a huge team of collaborators across many, many disciplines of acoustics and across a wide swathe of the research community. And we're very proud of those relationships and really proud of what we've been able to achieve with very, very small resources. We really deliver a big return on investment.
If you're watching on video, unfortunately after this point, George's camera lost focus. We assume that this will only improve your experience watching the show, as George's face is now slightly obscured.
I mean, obviously you can't go out one year and just go, right, this year we're going to solve the noise problem. I mean, it's not realistic. And I think one of the things I like about the NAS is you break, and one of the ways you break your objectives down is into campaigns. So, at the minute, you've got multiple campaigns at the minute. You've got Soundscape, Silent Approach, Quiet Mark, which I think is now a separate company, and one that Dan and I really like the sound of is one called Love Your Ears.
Yeah.
Which I'll actually ask a question about in a minute. But I suppose, can you describe these campaigns and why these campaigns are the ones that the NAS has selected in particular?
A campaign that John Connell had originally started, he's called Love Your Neighbor. And it was about, he did a series of posters and outreach materials. And the principle is that if we understand how sound affects us personally, from a hearing health point of view, as well as from an emotional, psychological point of view, if we understand that for ourselves, if we're self-aware, then that's the starting point for being other aware. In other words, if I understand how sound affects me and noise affects me, hopefully I'm going to be much more aware of how the sound or the noise I make might affect someone else, and hopefully more empathetic to them, but also more aware of not wanting to cause unnecessary noise pollution. And that's a very purposeful campaign, because in most places, in most urban places, one of the number one sources of noise problems is neighbor to neighbor noise. So Love Your Ears, as the campaign evolved, is really about learning how sound affects us so we can also understand and be more empathetic and sensitive to our neighbors, and by extrapolation, then the society around us as well. So that campaign, we have a curriculum where we can go into, designed for school children up to university students. Where we go in and we just do, really, it's just a simple talk, theoretically simple talk module, where it's really raising awareness of what is sound, the basics about sound, the basics about how we hear and how we process sound, and then how sound affects us, and how that then moves out from us ourselves to our neighbors and to society in general. And we work with an audiologist on those talks at the moment. We've had a long-standing relationship with an audiologist from Boots Hearing Care. And so we get scheduled to do these talks, and we go into schools, and sometimes it's to young children, but we also get a lot of interest from pro audio courses and things like that, because it's incredible. Oftentimes people studying in pro audio, while they learn clearly the technical aspects of sound and acoustics, they don't necessarily fully understand, the dangers to themselves of, exposure too loud and too long to certain types of sounds, and how to just take care of their hearing health as well. So that's what Love Your Ears is about. And, it's, that's just such a great example of whoever we talk to on the Love Your Ears program, get really excited about how personal acoustics is to each one of us. Because again, going back to what I said earlier, even if we don't understand it, because we haven't been taught about acoustics, we innately understand it because we all have a hearing sense. And when we start to describe how we respond or how sound affects us, that's an aha moment.
Aha!
Because we all respond to sound in some form or another, very similarly. Even if we have different preferences, the mechanisms of how we respond are that's a commonality across all humanity.
My first job was working in a local authority, and a lot of the noise issues weren't people being, necessarily causing, knowingly causing problems. They just weren't aware that, the impact it could have on other people. I fancy playing music in the middle of the night. There's just lack of awareness, and I think it's a really interesting relationship relating that to self-awareness. Because when I read about the Love Yours campaign, one aspect of it was about the actual damage that is caused by by playing, kids having iPhones and playing really loud music, and actually understanding how how dangerous that could be. But actually, from what you're saying, it's actually a much bigger concept. It's actually really interesting. But I suppose to do with the other campaigns, Silent Approach and the Quiet Mark. How would you describe those?
Yeah, so Silent Approach is a really exciting campaign. And that was established by Gloria Elliott, our chief executive, in around 2006. And the concept of Silent Approach was started in response to lots of complaints the society was getting about delivery and servicing noise from freight and goods deliveries in towns and cities. The concept is, rather than stopping deliveries, how can we make them safe, clean, quiet, and efficient? And this plays to a broader concept, an underlying philosophy, if you will, of all of the Noise Abatement Society's campaigns. Rarely do we say something shouldn't happen, because usually when we look at a problem, the issue isn't that the problem can't be solved. It's that it might be difficult to solve, it might be very inconvenient, it might be very expensive because of the way things have developed over time. But the principle is these are human-made problems, therefore we can solve them. And that's where I go back to, how can we drive innovation? How can we be a catalyst to do things better, to solve problems, or look at different ways of doing things? And in some cases be a disruptor, and no doubt highly annoying to some of the people that we say, look, we believe you can do better here. So Silent Approach is one of those campaigns where we just said, right, noisy deliveries are not an inevitable byproduct of people needing goods and services. Why can't they be done so that they do not cause disturbance? And that doesn't mean they are necessarily silent, although that's the name of the program, because of course it's a great aspiration. But how can they be done in ways where they do not cause noise pollution? So if nobody's around to hear the delivery, then that's one thing. So sometimes it could be about rerouting, looking at different options for when certain things are delivered. Some activities are noisier than others. So it might just be maybe some managerial or operational decisions that can solve the problem. Or it could be quieter equipment, or it could also be training. Sometimes colleagues just, again, going back to the point you made earlier, do not understand how, when they're doing a job that they love or are excited about doing, just want to get done, and they might be throwing things around because that's expedient, which of course we all understand, they may not really be aware of how genuinely disturbing that is to people. And so that also can create some conflicts, because you think, okay, do you want your milk, or do you want silence and no food? So, but we just say, look, it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? I mean, it's not beyond the wit of our collective imaginations and resources to actually find a way where we can have both. We can have our food, we can have our deliveries, and we can do it without causing unnecessary disturbance. And so that was our challenge to the freight industry. And through the Silent Approach program, we've worked extensively throughout the UK with local authorities. We ran a practical applied research project with the Department for Transport and the Freight Transportation the Freight Transport Association, which is the UK's largest freight trade body, industry trade body, and also a 4-year project with Transport for London that started during the Olympics. Because in the Olympics, you may remember the London 2012 Games, 24/7, overnight deliveries became a very big issue because of restrictions that were put on the Olympic route networks in the city that needed to be open during the day. So that put pressure on retailers about how they were going to get their goods and services. So there was this, for some it was a problem. We actually saw it as a great opportunity to prove our point that this could be done if the will was there to do it, because noise abatement restrictions were not lifted during the Olympics, but retailers were not allowed, deliveries were not allowed to be made during the daytime. So, and necessity, as they say, it drives invention. So we worked with the Freight Transport Association, with retailers, with policymakers, with a large collaboration of people to actually begin to test and prove this theory and concept. And that is now the basis of Transport for London's retiming deliveries campaign and the Department for Transport's Quiet Deliveries demonstration scheme, which we co-curated and co-led with others. And the program was so successful because when you think about it, you were able to open up the 24/7 potential for a 24/7 delivery window, which provides enormous operational benefits for operators and retailers, clear levels of convenience for residents, and many, many more options logistically, and freeing up congestion on the road network, less heavy goods vehicles during peak times. I mean, there's numerous benefits to solving this problem, but one of the barriers, some might say the chief barrier, was noise at unsociable hours. And so what we were able to say with the Silent Approach campaign, it's not like we're saying, well, you can deliver at night quietly, but then be noisy in the daytime. It's like, no, the idea is that by improving practices and having more efficiency in the delivery and servicing practices, that then frees up investment for innovation. It also helps to drive a market for quiet equipment. So it's actually better. And that's where you get into, it's driven. That has definitely helped. We've seen a real rise in the amount of quiet equipment available. And this program was, a form of this program was actually mandated by the Dutch government. So there is a country that actually has this requirement as a law, but other countries have not done that. And in the UK, there was not a desire to do that, which again is understandable. But there is a real market now for quiet equipment that has come out of that project. And so much so that in the Chancellor's autumn 2011 statement, the Quiet Delivery Demonstration Scheme was actually named as a driver for growth for the transportation industry. So that is an example of what happens when, we can come in and be, if you will, a critical friend, but a neutral party. We want to solve the problem for the residents, which are arguably our main stakeholder. But in order to do that, solving the problem for the residents isn't saying to them, you can't get your milk when you need it. No, why can't, we want you to have your milk whenever you need it. And at the same time, we want industry to be able to thrive, because that drives a lot of, upstream and downstream benefits, which, helps, we would say, the whole of society in many ways. So that's the Silent Approach project.
During your time at NAS, what would you say is the thing that you are most proud of?
Well, that is a real tough one, because I have to say, really proud of a lot of the work that we've done. I'm really proud of the fact that we've been instrumental in helping to pass 3 soundscape standards now. And the UK have adopted those standards, and different administrations around the UK are actively looking at how they can incorporate soundscape principles within city master plans. Um, the Welsh government have published a noise and soundscape strategy, making them the first national government to explicitly publish a soundscape strategy. So I'm really proud of that work. I mean, it has been years in the making, and it's been worth every ounce of effort we've put into it. We really, really highlighted soundscape and the early days of its formation as a standard series, and we just knew once we heard about soundscape that it was definitely a big missing puzzle piece in terms of how noise is managed in the built environment. The work has been decades in the making, but I'm just really excited to see the global uptake of soundscape principles, research from around the world. The research body of soundscape is growing and exponentially, really, every year. And like I said, more and more governments and city administrations are looking at how they can actively incorporate soundscape principles into their management of the acoustic environment. So we're very, very proud of that. Um, a piece of work in particular that we're also very proud of is work that we did with Brighton and Hove called the Sounding Brighton Project. And that was a series of applied research projects that we did with the city. And that really set a template for how we work with other city and administrations and policymakers. And that work has inspired much of the work that has gone on in other cities in terms of piloted projects about soundscape. So, there's many researchers in soundscape, but we feel that we've really, we've added something to the practice and to the dialogue. And so we're very proud of that. And of course, the launching of Quiet Mark is something, again, that, we're just extremely proud of. And John Connell's daughter and granddaughter, so Gloria and Poppy in particular, have just taken that and, really, again, it's a global success, and it is growing every year and just going from strength to strength, and is really just a place to go and just get the best of the best in terms of quiet products and solutions and yeah, so we're just very, very proud of that. And now, just more recently, we've started to focus more on education, and that is our program called Future Sound Foundation, where we're looking at how can we begin to train and inspire in a more formal venues the next generation of urban sound planners and acousticians. So that is work that we're doing at the moment with Harriet Watt University and Goldsmiths University. And we also collaborate with researchers from University College London and Salford University and other universities around the world. So what we're looking at with those projects is how can we work with researchers or designers from across many different disciplines who might be interested in sound or possibly considering sound in their projects, but do not know about acoustics. In other words, they're not studying acoustics. So how can they come at the design of their project by incorporating soundscape principles within the design? And one project we worked on a couple of years ago was with the Royal College of Art and an industrial designer looking at a future car, and originally started from the premise of, well, how does she keep it from being too noisy inside, and then was able to move to actually designing the car from a soundscape perspective as well. with recognition that whoever was going to be in the car wanted to basically be in control of their acoustic environment, not just have somebody else make all the decisions for them about what was acceptable or not acceptable. So that's how we're working with Featured Sound Foundation, and we're really proud of that as well.
I mean, certainly the soundscape standard is a fantastic achievement, and definitely something to be proud of. But I think the last thing I want to talk about is, I mean, you mentioned John Connell earlier, but you have an annual award ceremony and the Noise Oscars, I think, as they're called. Two questions, I suppose. Have you got any real memorable winners or projects? And I think this one's come from Dan, actually, is there likely to ever be a Noise Oscar for Best Acoustics-related noise podcast with UK and Canada-based hosts who are in the mid-30s? Because I reckon we'll be in the top 10.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. Multinational and pushing the boundaries. Yeah, I like it. You should definitely apply for the hopefully 2021 Oscars. We've had to postpone them for 2020. Yeah, the John Connell Awards, named after our founder, were started 20 years ago by John Connell's daughter, Gloria Elliott, and have been held nearly annually, apart from 2 years. They've been held consecutively in London. And normally they're held, most of those years, they've been held at the House of Commons in the Palace of Westminster. So it's a very sort of fun, glittering affair, which is why they're called the Noise Oscars. And yeah, they're fantastic. And the aim of the John Connell Awards is to award best practice in terms of either solving noise problems or developing innovation and new ways of looking at solving noise, and also addressing soundscape and issues as well. So what we try to do with this is, with the awards, because they're the only ones of their kind, because they're, incredibly, there are just not many, if or any, awards for outside of the acoustic industry itself for best practice in design for goods, services, and practice on behalf of city administrations and public servants in terms of noise. And so one aim of the awards is to recognize best practice amongst environmental health officers, because they are just too little recognized in terms of the amazing work that they do, not just with noise, but across the environmental spectrum. But certainly with noise, there really isn't another place where they're recognized for that work. And then we also want to encourage best practice amongst industry and academia as well. In terms of some memorable awards, I mean, in one sense, it's like children, like they're all memorable because we research them, we look into them, and we really in one sense, hand pick. It's like you get to know each project a bit, and you think, you just really want to encourage everybody to continue with the best practice that they're doing. But a couple that come to mind just off the top of my head are, we gave an award to the 5 boroughs that collaborated during London 2012 around the site of the Olympic Park, because at the time, that was very innovative. It's much more common with larger scale projects now, but the Olympic site was built 24/7, and there were residents within about 30 meters of the perimeter. And in order to finish the project, which they did do on time and under budget, they had to do 24/7 build, which means that they had to really, really think about best practice in terms of noise management. And they did that through a combination of operational practices, certain types of quiet equipment, and various other things that are probably much more common and commonly understood now, but at the time weren't necessarily used so often. And the project was managed by 5 local authority boroughs, and they did an excellent job and worked very cooperatively and set up many sort of best practices that are still used now on other projects. So we gave them an award, and I remember that because it, because that was a real representation of how to solve these problems is through better collaborative working practices. So that was one of the ones that stood out.
No, but it's just because you said there's two.
Yeah,
I know. I was just trying. I know. Lost my train of thought because I don't want to leave. I feel like I mentioned one and then I leave others out.
No, actually, I think that's a very commendable one. Actually, there's someone who used to work for Environment Health. I wholly agree that they're completely underappreciated, and I think people don't quite understand the breadth of knowledge that they're required to have to fulfill their role. It's not in consultancy that you can be pigeonholed and work on one thing, but in local authority, that is just not an option.
Yeah, so, they are unsung heroes. They really are.
EHO.
Can you imagine having to go out and ask somebody to turn down their music when they're having a party and things like that? I mean,
don't worry, I'll sort it.
Really, they have a thankless task in that sense. So, we owe them a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd love to move on to kind of what is next for Noise Abatement Society. And I guess I had a suggestion for the quiet mark thing. And like maybe in your branding, you could maybe introduce like a person called Mark who is quite quiet, and he could be like your ambassador for that kind of mark that they get.
I will pass that on to the Quiet Mark team.
See what file it on the bin, I think.
Yeah. I think we need a mascot.
Exactly. Yeah. You might not have to, find a Mark. You could get someone that would pretend to be Mark, or like George. I think George is pretty free at the moment. He could step in there. But yeah, no, kind of moving forward, it'd be great to know. Like, I think these societies, such as the Noise Abatement Society, are going to be more relevant. Like not just now, but in the future compared to the established time, in the 50s. What's your kind of thoughts on that? Do you think you might grow? Do you think you might change tact, or do you think you're going to keep very solid and true on the kind of mentalities you have today and just kind of keep going with the cause?
In one sense, all of the above. I mean, it would be great to grow, and it's such a temptation as well. The challenge is, and I've really seen this over the time I've been working in noise, is it can be really hard to stay relevant if you're as a campaign group, because if we're too invested in one area, then it can be very difficult to be relevant in another area, because part of what you end up doing then, of course, is you're managing the process of being good in one area, which, there's something to be said for being good in one area. But it in terms of noise, because it affects societies holistically, it's the combination of noise sources in a society that affect them. We don't want to lose the ability to be able to, let's say, quickly recalibrate and focus on an area if we need to. And because there are, hundreds and hundreds of specialists and experts in any particular area of noise, we know that our particular strength and our place, if you will, in the ecosystem of acoustics, as being an independent broker, if you will, to drive innovation and be a catalyst for change, we always want to be able to partner with people at the cutting edge of what's happening next, because that's where we want to be, so that we can help avoid the downstream issues of not solving a noise problem at the inception of a new industry or a new area of product development or that sort of thing. So, at the moment we're looking at, UAVs. There's so many future areas as noise evolves that we always want to be in a position to be able to move quickly, to be relevant in that dialogue. So at the moment, it seems, the most effective way to do that is probably remaining small, and then we can work very specifically with experts and specialists as they arise, in particular areas of industry. But we see probably one of the main areas of our future in really developing education and training for, if you will, tomorrow's designers, because that and by designers I mean engineers, architects, across the whole spectrum, and really beginning to build out what it practically looks like to achieve what Schaefer talks about, this nexus between science, society, and the arts. That requires new disciplines, new types of training, new skills development to augment the specialist training that people already have. So we want to be able to speak to engineering students or architecture students or music students or industrial design students and really help them to understand the power of sound, how it affects us, how it makes people feel, and how it can be, and how to design for good acoustic environments so that affects positive outcomes for people in terms of health and well-being. So we really want to see those principles embedded within education across the board. So that's a big focus for the future.
No, I think it's really important to keep pushing and keep trying to educate people more, and that's kind of one of the reasons we started the show. Really, was to help people understand how they can get into the industry and help them be more aware of initiatives like what the Noise Abatement Society do. So it's really interesting, and it's great to hear like that's just a focus, and you're not going away, and you're just going to keep building on. But the education piece, I think, is the bit that the industry as a whole needs to do more. I think it's been neglected, personally, that we have it in, globally. I'm talking is like there's pockets of the world that do things really well, and there's the broad sense of it that just don't understand, or the public have no kind of understanding as to what things are done. A lot of our work is done under the cover of darkness, for want of a better term. But I think it'd be nice to know a bit more about what your plans are for the future personally. Like what do you see as, because you've been working on, your doctorate and you've got various qualifications and degrees. Is there something that you're trying to do in the background to help you improve yourself?
In terms of the doctorate, I've been wanting to do one for a very, very long time, but I just couldn't decide what topic I wanted to do it in. And as the work with soundscape evolved, I thought, gosh, that's it for me. I really want to, add to my own original research to the work that I've been doing with other researchers, and just really add to the body of evidence and knowledge around soundscape. And the purpose of doing the doctorate as part of my work with the Noise Abatement Society is really part of us developing this outreach around Future Sound Foundation, which is to educate and inform and support the next generation of sound designers, urban sound planners, whether they're architects and industrial designers, acousticians, engineers, what have you. And so the two are linked in terms of, my future plans is how can I play my part with helping to teach and train and support and mentor this next generation. We just see this as a really exciting time, whereas much of the work with soundscape research over the last decade has been very formative. There is now a move, because soundscape is at its heart a practical science. So there's a real move now to really support research to practice evidence building. Because to apply soundscape principles correctly, we need to understand how to assess and measure the acoustic environment from the perspective of users in context. So that precipitates the need for really vast amounts of good quality evidence that's developed in situ or in really well constructed lab environments. And to do that, there is just a unique need for those who are being trained at the moment, current students, for them to really understand how to begin to incorporate these principles into their learning now, so that when they come out into real world environments, they're able to really add this value to the teams that they join. And so my future plans and the work of the NAS are really aligned in that. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to contributing a lot more in terms of, not just in terms of research, but in teaching and mentoring the next generation.
I think that's a perfect segue into the most important part of the show, which is cracking a beer and chatting through some of the acoustic news. But I believe George is already way ahead of me and Lisa, so we're playing catch up a bit here. But in preparation, what I'm going to do now, George, is start wearing, you can't see this, but brewery T-shirts, because our main aim, George and I, to get basically sponsored by breweries to provide us with beer. So if you're watching Tofino Brewing Company, you can send us some beer and we can drink.
And this was our unspoken objective.
It isn't unspoken anymore. Yeah.
Excellent, a motivator.
So, I'm drinking the Rutting Elk Red from Grizzly Paw Brewing Company in Alberta here. So.
Oh, well, I need to run and get mine, actually. Lisa, have you got yours with you?
I do. Here, I am drinking Anchor Steam Christmas Porter.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, and the label says Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. So as the interview is taking place in January, it's appropriate.
Yeah, it was reduced.
They only make a limited amount of the Christmas ale each year, and I'm telling you, I bought one of the last 4 bottles I could find in the UK. So
wow, that's amazing.
I've saved it for tonight.
That's amazing. I'm just going to run and get mine. 2 seconds, hold on.
George pretending that he hasn't got alcohol in his immediate reach is nice. No, we like to drink a beer and kind of chill out a little bit, reflect on the news that's going around in the world, and it's nice to do that, I think, rather than taking things too seriously.
It's a big attraction about coming on the program.
The only one.
No.
Well, I'm just going to show mine. I've got, for those who don't know, I live just off Penny Lane in Liverpool. So I'm drinking Love Lane, which is brewed in Liverpool. And it's great. So
you make it in your bedroom or back room or something?
Yeah. God, I wish. I would never leave the house.
There's no way I'm coming out of here. I've got all this homebrew to drink.
So we've got San Francisco, Alberta, and Liverpool.
Yeah.
Represented.
Yeah. Oh, yours is from San Francisco. Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah. Cool.
Via Chester, I think. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cool. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Guys.
Cheers. Virtual cheers. The news articles are slightly outside of what we've been talking about, but quite interesting. So, George, do you want to take the first one?
No.
Okay. Well, we kind of touched on this in an episode with James Trow on the aviation side of things. So, it's basically a psychoacoustic approach to building knowledge about the human response to the noise of unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones and the like. And I think this is quite interesting because it's going to be, and if not already, a huge problem, especially when we switch to delivery and through these means, but also the recreational aspect of it. I know that we have bans in certain areas for these things, but I'd love to really pick your brains a little bit, Lisa, about what the Noise Abatement Society has been thinking on this kind of thing.
Yeah, we are so concerned about it. And it's a perfect opportunity for soundscape management to get into the design of unmanned aerial vehicles now, rather than trying to fix these issues once design specifications are let's say relative minimum specifications are agreed. And to what I said earlier about training, research, and development, this is an area that we're starting to work in. So we are collaborating with some researchers and looking at how we can also do our own research in this area. And there's a session at Internoise 2021 this year in August, which is looking at the future UAVs and soundscape. And I'm developing that session with Dr. Antonio Torria from Salford University. So, and there's several sessions about noise and drones. So, as to your point, yes, it's a big issue. In terms of psychoacoustics, this is really important. We've been advocates for some time about the need to have far more training and usage of psychoacoustic metrics in just traditional noise control practices, but they're also really relevant to soundscape management as well, because the psychoacoustic parameters can just provide additional dimensions in assessing the acoustic environment. And when those are mapped with perceptual data as well about how people are responding to something in context, whether that perceptual data is gathered in context or in a lab environment, when mapped together with psychoacoustic evaluations, it can be very, very powerful in providing a much more nuanced picture of how people are responding and why they're responding to certain elements within the acoustic environment.
Just reviewing some of the figures like in here for comparisons against other traditional aircraft. There's an image in there of the 737 MAX 8 and compares it to the DJI Major C200, and it just shows that there are different spectra, but they are generally quite similar characteristics. But there's this high frequency element of the drones that just becomes more annoying, and they've also got tonal contributions like an aircraft would do, but in kind of a low frequency, mid frequency region. So they just have so much potential to be annoying. It's insane that I have a drone myself and I fly it, but even then I'm like really conscious about where I fly it and what I do with it, and it's just a nightmare.
I think it's your point right then. That's what I got from this as well, is that the acoustic factors are different. It's got high frequency, and also the heights at which they fly means that the sound energy in those frequencies aren't absorbed the same as they are in traditional aircraft. But it's the non-acoustic factors with this, and it's things like the intrusiveness of them, the way that the way that the sound isn't as expectant, maybe. And I reading this, I know Lisa and I know Charlotte, and I can see that they've mentioned in here those words that are related to soundscape. Loudness, sharpness, tonality, duration, strength. Do you see this as being the big opportunity for soundscape? Because I really see this drones is going to be a boom, and it's a real opportunity if things move fast, where soundscape could be a real controlling factor for it. It's an opportunity to appropriately manage the noise from them.
Yes, it's an immense opportunity from a soundscape perspective. But in order to maximize that opportunity, it's really, really important to get better understanding, better research, better evidence around non-acoustic factors related specifically to the acoustic profile of drones as they're developing. And it's the need to merge those things, merge that data and analyze it together, that is going to really help to provide, if you will, the right sort of insights for designers and therefore also incentives for developers, because just having the psychoacoustic data on its own, while it's useful, it it's still objective data, and what we really need to understand are the non-acoustic factors about what might be driving potential annoyance uh, with let's say a typical drone profile. And some of it will be, you know, an intrusion factor. Some of it could be the way they fly or the direction they fly. I mean, there could be many different reasons, but it's really important to also have concurrent research that is looking at these non-acoustic factors about how people are responding to drones. Because if it's just looked at from an acoustic perspective, it can be really tempting to say, well, we know that certain things are annoying to people, like let's say high frequency noises. So there's a certain amount of logic to say, okay, well, we'll just design that out or we'll try to design them differently. But invariably, with any design changes, there's a cost benefit trade off. And so there's always going to be a discussion about at what point do you say, okay, well, how annoying is it really? And this goes back to the silent approach argument. Do you want your milk, or or do you want to put up, can you put up with noise for a few minutes but to get your milk? So you get a bit of noise, or you have no milk. It's up to you. And these trade-off discussions inevitably have to happen because design features cost money, and so there will be design decisions being made that have a knock-on effect. So having the evidence to understand how people are going to react to drones, the psychobiological effects, and some of the non-acoustic factors in terms of emotional and perceptual responses. So it's really important to be able to justify, if a decision is being taken, what's the right decision, and how to justify that in terms of cost-benefit analysis for product development cycles.
Do you think it's going too far? Is it becoming to a point where we're starting to not be able to manage these things as well as we might like? And is it opening up like a Pandora's box of, you know what I mean? Like, we can always say that we have this kind of trade-off of silence to like getting your milk or whatever, but it becomes more difficult when it's happening right at your doorstep and it's the neighbor getting delivered or whatever. Is it the fact that we crave convenience so much now and it's becoming an expectation that it's going to be a detriment to other things? And like, if we're constantly saying that, noise needs to go down, we're more exposed to noise than we ever have been, there's a lot of health effects associated with it. Is it just, and I'm not expecting a definitive answer, but it's a conversation starter, is it going too far? Is the unmanned aerial vehicles, is that the right thing to be doing? I mean, in my mind, I'm starting to think, okay, it's convenient, but the solution to me is, not letting it happen. Do you know what I mean? In the areas, and it becomes difficult to trade off. I don't know.
I think maybe it might be the case that some things are a bit more acceptable. It's sort of, some of this harps back a bit to the love your neighbor aspect. Is that, if your neighbor's getting their milk delivered at 4 a.m. they can get a delivery at 4 a.m. There's nothing stopping them. It's the same thing. It's just going to be with a drone, but it may be it's an educational aspect to it, but also really focusing on what do we, if there's only a limited amount of capacity, which you'd hope there was, that really we are only using this for things, like their taglines is, at the minute we use them for things like blood deliveries and stuff like that. These things that people go, well, that's okay because you make the same allowances with ambulances. But I agree with you, Dan. Where is the trade-off with convenience and impact?
I think the way we look at it is noise is not the inevitable byproduct of progress. These are design and engineering issues. They're not inevitability issues. So our pushback, if you will, is if something is needed or if something is going to help improve quality of life, we're not against progress. What we're saying is that there is a lot of effort being put into developing, new equipment or new ways of deliveries in these cases. So all we're asking for is the same, is that acoustics, good acoustic quality, soundscape management is given parity with every other design solution that's happening. So if the purpose of something that's being designed, like a drone, is to provide, better convenience, you can make a health or a potential health argument there. You could make a well-being argument. You could make a quality of life. If the whole purpose is to improve quality of life and make things better in general, well, then by definition, that includes good acoustic design. The fact that good acoustic design is oftentimes left out of such discussions is a flaw in the discussion. It's not a flaw in the premise that this, that a drone can help improve quality of life aspects. So what we're saying is fantastic. Develop, innovate, include good acoustic design as a priority amongst all the other design specifications that are being developed. And this goes back to so why we're so excited to work with the designer um, working working on this future car concept. She was willing to consider, okay, well, how could good quality acoustic design and a soundscape management approach enhance her car design? And there was a competition amongst students at the RCA that was being run for this project. And she was one of 4 students whose project was chosen for the soundscape design. So what started out as something that she was working on to just include, because it was a luxury car design, so it was just to include, let's call it a minimal or acceptable level of noise abatement, she actually then turned that on its head and, like a true designer, saw the power of, if you will, sound as another template for design. And she actually was recognized for that in her project being chosen as one of 4 by this luxury car manufacturer who was sponsoring the competition. So that's what we want to see is, yes, let's have these improvements, but make sure that acoustics has parity at the design table with everything else that is being considered, because acoustics is essential. Good acoustics is essential to our health and well-being.
The other article I wanted to talk about was a little bit outside of what we would normally discuss on the show, but it's flow physics, which is basically acoustics, waves, and basically trying to get that technology and understanding to help forecasters predict extreme weather events. So we're mainly focusing on tornadoes and hurricanes and the like, but essentially before a tornado forms, basically they emit an infrasound signature between like 1 and 10 hertz. And basically they're saying that they can detect these things, obviously at large, big distances away from where this might start, and start to detect and give early warning signs of when tornadoes might occur. So it's great to see that like acoustic technology is developing in this way to help us even just manage weather systems. So we have tornadoes as more of an issue over here in North America, but in the States there's thousands happen each year, and getting people out early enough and warning them enough is the most important thing. So I found this really interesting that sound is being used in this way.
Well, I was just checking actually, because I'm sure it might surprise people from where you are, Dan, that tornadoes aren't really a thing in the UK that I'm aware of. But we did have one in Birmingham in 2005. But the strongest one we ever had was in Portsmouth in 1810, which had winds of 240 miles an hour. So
Wow.
When it does happen, it seems to be, for me, that sounds pretty...
Go big or go home, basically.
Literally a reason to stay in.
You'll not catch me going outside in this weather.
Well, it's not an area that's not an area that we've been working with at the NAS, but I just think, I think it's fantastic that this new research and these principles are being used. Once again, acoustics is in everything. It affects everything. And so, you know, fantastic that they're using this. I think it's, acoustic signals have such rich information in them. And it's really exciting to see new developments in acoustics now with in medical science as well, in terms of helping to detect certain diseases. It's very exciting. So that's a great development. More of those, please.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see that people aren't getting complacent and they're starting to push, get sound involved. Like when we touched on previous episode where we had underwater sound propagation telling us how quickly oceans are warming, which is not great news, but at least we can quantify it, and sound is being used there again. But it's been great to have you on the show, Lisa. Amazing insight to a very niche area of acoustics, but will become very much more prominent in coming years, definitely.
It's been a great pleasure to be with you guys. Fantastic.
Thank you. It's been great.
You don't have to lie. It's fine.
Oh no, I've been admiring the show, so it's an honor to be asked to come on.
I can't see you, but I can tell by your voice. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. I've got your fingers crossed, have you?
No, it's been a pleasure. It's been fantastic to have you on, and I'd encourage everyone to either reach out to Lisa or check out what the Noise Abatement Society are doing. They're an integral part of the development of acoustics industry and really flying the flag, basically, to make us do better things, which I think is fantastic. So one of our next episodes, we will actually have Rob Galt on, who is the CEO of the large speaker manufacturer Eminence. So that'll be interesting to catch up. So if that kind of intrigues you, feel free to tune in. But as for now, we will see you in the next episode. Thanks so much, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.